Now I can read.
We're live, my friend.
Good evening. Thank you for joining. Hopefully, we'll hear back from some of you sometime soon. And then give us a thumbs up, follow the channel. Um, would like your comments below.
I'm joined by Rob Mothershed, an architect here in California. We met in 2013. Dang, 11 years ago. At SciArc.
That's right. Do you remember the name of the lecture?
It was Tom Wiscombe. What was it? I don't remember what the lecture was called.
I think it was him. And I think it was called Emergent Architecture back then. And
At that point, he had rebranded to Tom Wiscombe Design, and then now he's rebranded to Tom Wiscombe Architecture. But yeah, it used to be Emergent. Way back.
okay, so to kick it even two cans back in 2006, 2007 in the summer, Tom spoke at a lecture when it was Emergent at a bar with like four people, and I sat on the front row, and he talked about the dragonfly.
Ooh.
And the making, the fabrication, the detailing, the engineering, the CATIA. He talked about, don't laugh, some amphibian embryological abstraction, and then how it hypermorphed and tessellated into this and that. And the popular theory, I think, was at that moment, 2006, not 2013, was swarm theory. And it was pre-parametric, maybe, but
Yeah.
Architecture. Just to quickly jump into LA, maybe not with Tom per se, but LA architecture is always about pushing the envelope, pushing the maximum envelope, I guess, pushing the maximum height, maximum density, maximum lot coverage, maximum landscape, maximum parking,
Dang.
the max. Everything's max. You don't start with the minimum. You start with the max, and then you look at your budget, which is not the max, and then you reconfigure from there.
Yeah. It's very developer driven. I wonder if the East Coast is different in that sense. I mean, well, East Coast, more large projects, probably more requirement for public space, more requirement to incorporate public art into the work, all that kind of stuff, and more sturdy architecture, more stone, more concrete. Probably nothing wood frame.
No. East Coast is about tradition, not breaking tradition. It's the polar opposite of the West Coast, literally, maybe some longitudinal latitude. But the East Coast likes to have a lot of brick. And then one would say, why would someone want a lot of brick? Well, brick is from the earth, and it's a colonial revival material from Jeffersonian age, about 1680, 1720, revolutionary times. But the brick, I think it's a labor intensive exterior. It requires a lot of thermal control with the exterior. But you don't see a lot of brick buildings here in LA. Number one, because it's earthquake land. Number two, because it's expensive with the labor versus a thin stucco exterior. And then the East Coast is a little bit more on the business side. West Coast is definitely more relaxed, more chill, more calm, more smooth. Um, it's hard to really compare East versus West. One's a theoretical, traditional place where you could look at the theory of architecture more of in trying to institute or deconstitute or reinstitute some kind of verbiage explanation. So on the East Coast, it's very rational, and on the West Coast, it's very irrational. One is very experimental, and then one is what I call a direct download from European modernism. You had Marcel Breuer, Mies van der Rohe, some Corbusier buildings over in Harvard. You had a large World War II influence. And then the greatest, probably American architect before Frank Gehry was Frank Lloyd Wright. So the School of Franks Frank was all over the place, as far as I know, not to be a history lesson, but I think he went through about 3 or 4 different families, 3 or 4 different time zones in terms of having a practice, a studio, business. And then this whole Taliesin thing burning down made him sort of rebuild himself in a way. I think that a lot of architects will probably get to if they stick with it long enough. So it looks like we are multi-broadcasting here somehow.
We got TikTok over there. We got YouTube over here. We're about to have Instagram without a title. East.
So I graduated architecture the first time. I started in 1994, graduated in December 96 at Clemson. And it's a good old boys school there. Everyone kind of knew everyone, last name Smith or Johnson or Robertson. And then with the East Coast, it's kind of a merit-based way where you actually work your way through something, earn something. And then here it's more about getting notarized, getting something built. Whereas there, it's more of a network, a longevity, brotherhood. And it's probably less dog eat dog there. And whereas here, it's all dog eat dog, which could relate to our scripture today somehow if we look at Deuteronomy. And if we look at Deuteronomy, which is the Old Testament of the Holy Bible, the sacred text, the canonical text, if you want to use a big word, our scripture is from chapter 14, and it's before giving, before tithes. But the word says, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So that's pretty profound in terms of this particular scripture, because it's talking about you may give it to alien. I'm sorry, let me rewind. Do not eat anything that you find already dead. You may give it to an alien living in any of your towns, and he may eat it, and you may sell it to a foreigner. So if you were just to take that one snippet and maybe apply that snippet to architecture, being a foreigner, I'm not from LA, I've been here 20 years come August. And then in 2004, I moved here from Atlanta, which is super traditional, deep South, deep state, if you will. Coming here, not knowing anyone, had no friends, no family, no cousins, no school people, no architecture buddies, no architecture friends, no architecture pals. So just started going to SciArc and to a couple of the lectures at UCLA. And then really seeing what kind of architecture was here in 2004. So if you go back 20 years, 2 decades, way before COVID, way before smartphones, everyone had a flip phone. There was public updates with architecture programs, but to keep it architecture centric, LA was a hotbed. A lot of cool, super cool, awesome architecture was coming out in 2004, 5, 6, and 7 before the 08 recession. And then to make that work in a world now, you wouldn't see the dollars being spent in design, renderings, in today's kind of fast-paced small practice. You get a small retainer, you do 2 or 3 options, maybe they're sketches. And then if you're lucky, you'll get it through planning, get an entitlement, get a master land use agreement. Then you're super lucky to get it built. Even if you get paid to get it built, cost of construction could go up. For example, in my little practice, we had 2 buildings up in Rio Vista. We had $4.5 million when we started the planning process, same design, added no square footage to the buildings. 6 months after COVID, what was a $4.5 million building is now $12.5 million. So somehow or another, things got hyperinflated, 3x, I'll leave that. So that didn't come out of the ground. So they ended up selling the property for about $1.5 million. And but we have a set of drawings ready to go.
It feels like a thing with most architecture practices nowadays, even the big shots, where a large percentage of the projects designed in the firm don't actually end up getting built for one reason or another. The architect ends up getting the permit, and then the owner decides the project doesn't make sense financially or time-wise or for some other reason. Or sometimes they even kill the project, like through schematic design, somewhere in the middle. And it's, I mean, I wouldn't say it's sad, because some of the greatest architects some of the greatest work is unbuilt, and maybe it adds to the work when it's unbuilt. Like Levius Woods is my favorite designer. Your favorite too?
Oh.
My all-time favorite.
I'll just chime in, not to disrupt, but 1995 went to Washington D.C. I was chapter president of AIS, and then we did some fundraising to get there. But in 1995 we met Levius, and then didn't really hang out with him for drinks or anything like that, or a milkshake or pizza. But he actually came into a lecture, used a PowerPoint of his drawings using slides. If you remember 35 millimeter, they had 35 millimeter slides on these drawings. And people didn't know what the hell he was talking about. So I didn't even know who he was. He was the fifth person. That was my intro, was Washington, D.C. at an AIA Friday night, 8:30 lecture. It was during a thing called Grassroots in the summer. And these buildings looked like they all were about ready to explode or implode. And then they were hyper expressive. I wanted to call it neo-cartoonish. But at the time, there was, I'm going to call it, and this is a geeky word, a tectonic. And then the tectonic in his particular construct, from what I remember, and this is just a faded memory, but it was this social dimension where kind of the unbuilding is a rebuilding and the new building is sort of a scab, and it had memories of scars. And in the scar memory, there was a certain tissue that got exposed. But if you really try to look at Levius as an architect who was never going to build in 1995, he really, here, I brought the book. Do you want to see the book?
Oh,
That's-
heck yes.
Sorry, I robbed the shelf literally 2 hours ago.
Rob robbed the shelf. Yeah, Levius Woods was proposing to rebuild Sarajevo, Bosnia, after a war that damaged a lot of the structures there. And he was proposing to rebuild it by having the scars visible. And he argued that the scars we have on our bodies help us grow and help us be aware of the past. So he argued that architecturally, when we rebuild after a war, we should have what was visible from the damage remain, and the new architecture be built around it.
This was in the lecture that I went to, 1995. And as you can see, how would you say this? For me, his stuff was super political. It was during a war, during Sarajevo, I think it was, 1994 maybe. And these are, I'm going to call instruments or objects of instruments or a combined hybrid of instruments, whereas always this apocalyptic, dystopian, super hypergraphic visual, imposed, collaged, and there was this synergy that you never saw before. Before Levius, I'd never seen it. And from what I remember of that lecture is that a large movement, a large culture was going to be underground. I think it was in Berlin.
Yeah,
Okay.
Berlin Underground Project.
I don't know exactly, but one thing that we were trying to look at bringing in is the architectural education and what is in the library versus what your professor tells you versus what you learn on your own, and then maybe we could get into it now or kind of rap about the East versus West. But can you actually train an architect? Can you train a dog? What does it take? Is a dog an architect? Is architecture dog, really a profession? And then not to go super deep back into the scripture, but to tie it all together. But what I found in architecture school is that you're constantly doing crits, you're doing pinups, whether it's every other Friday or this Friday, or you're having disc crits. You have to convince your professor that you have some control power, manipulation, knowledge of the intent of your design. And if you can't communicate verbally, let's just say use a couple of unclear words, you have to graphically represent this. And I don't think in today's education, there's that defending your design. Why this design? And then why 15 feet tall versus 150 feet tall, or this kind of solution. So what I learned that architecture was before is communication, whether it's a media or a form of media, but architectural is you're drawing what you're speaking and you're speaking what you're drawing. And then maybe some of the channels have changed where you're rendering and sketching and modeling, but it has to be legible, readable, and somewhat on point with the intent. So if you're coming to a design problem and then it could be 47 different things and all of them are unclear, it's very, in my education, it was very C plus, if you will. So I know this is a professor from Woodbury, 2 years ago, something happened there. I'm not sure if I know the full story, but I think teaching architecture requires a certain patience, a certain amount of nurture and nature, and then inspiration. You can't be all split this way, that way, this way, that way, this way. You have to be pretty firm and established and kind of moving the whole studio a certain way to a certain type of music. You can't have everyone playing jazz and then classical over here. Everyone's kind of has to be together. Do you have any teaching philosophies that you think that could help today's student?
I think most architecture schools become research laboratories for the instructors. And when you look at the work, you can tell who the instructor is. And the instructor is getting like 20 different ideas for the project that relates to what they're working on in their practices, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad
Like
thing.
Tom Main's UCLA class? Is that what
Yeah. Oh, like he has.
like urbanism and global constructions and societies in South America relating to societies in Japan somehow? I don't know. All these
Yeah.
mass density, operational economics, and he did a LA Now book in 2006. Do you have it or have you
The
seen it?
Haiti book?
No, it's called LA Now. It was in
Oh,
2000.
LA Now. No, I have a book called Haiti Now.
No, it was by Tom Main. All of his UCLA students.
Yeah.
They were looking at downtown LA and how many cars you could get parked, how many gallons of water, how much CO2, how much carbon offset. Um, then they looked at redoing Dodger Stadium. They looked at doing the Arts District, the business district. So looking at in downtown LA, it closes at 5, 6 o'clock every single night, every single day of the week for past 23 years. So how to create a nightlife there and certain events and recreation and bars, lounges, restaurants, kind of repopulating it. But with Tom Main, I don't know, maybe go back to what you were saying, having the students.
I think Tom Main is an interesting example because he actually has his firm doing one kind of research, and in the universities he has a different kind of research. His practice, I think, is very formal, very architectural, and what he teaches at UCLA is very urbanistic, very socioeconomic, and the end product is not a formal piece of architecture at all. So that's interesting.
So knowing that you know Tom Main, the designer, the architect, the sculptor, the graphic engineer, visual, if you look at his research, what do you think you take away from it, and what in architecture research you think could be used to move forward, to move the profession forward, or the discipline or practice, however you want to call it, the business?
We architects need the ability to wear as many different hats as possible, because Tom Main, he puts on his formalist hat, goes to the office, and has his formal projects where you're looking at noodle shaped things and lima beans that come together and make crazy buildings. And then he puts on a different hat and goes to the universities and talks about research and looks at data and does a lot of data visualization with the students and tries to figure out what this region needs, what would cause this area to thrive, what would be good for it economically, socially, etc. And he probably puts on his business hat behind the scenes. We see these two hats he wears. We see the Morphosis hat, where he's doing really interesting, cool buildings, and we see the university hat where he's visualizing data with the students and doing research. And he probably has his business hat where he's talking numbers with clients and with contractors, and that's probably a very different Tom Main than we see. So
I think there's a new Tom Main, and then I never worked at Tom Main's. I think I applied once in 2003 or four. Um, I think I heard back there was a Sylvia lady, but she's gone now. But I went to, yeah, I think she wrote me once in 2003
Okay.
before I got here,
I think she teaches at UCLA.
maybe. And then, but there were like, just to go back, I'm from the East Coast. He's from the West Coast. I moved here to do architecture in LA, never left. So there were 5 big LA architects in 2005, 2004. These 5 architects are pretty much generally still around, maybe at different ages now.
Greg Lynn.
Greg Lynn, Eric Owen Moss, Tom Main, Frank Gehry.
Michael Malton.
Sure, why not?
Neil Denari.
I would say Neil Denari.
Neil Denari, yeah.
All right, so 5, one hand, top 5, not top 10. Even though there's, if you look in the AIA directory, there's 1,800 architects in the city of LA.
Okay. 1,800.
So it's a lot of architects. And I think there's over 30,000 architects in the state of California.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy because there's about 100,000 in the whole U.S. So there's probably more in California than there is anywhere else then in any other state.
So there's 106 schools of architecture in the United States, East Coast to West Coast, Oklahoma, Tennessee,
Whoa.
North Dakota, North Carolina, New York, Syracuse, you name it. So accrediting architecture school, teaching architecture, doing architecture after school. Why do architecture? Let's go back, rewind. So when you learn architecture, you're learning, I think what you're learning is to make a drawing. And in the drawing, you're inventing a mindset. And that mindset comes from your personal philosophy about a solution or a potential solution, a possible viable solution. But you're drawing or rendering or modeling a solution to a problem. And the thing that I've been thinking about pretty much is what is a real architecture problem? Not a fake problem, not an artificial problem, but looking at a problem that that is relevant in today's general operation of architecture. So not about trying to make money and get more clients, not about trying to I don't know, satisfy a certain agenda or pro forma or development agreement or city conditional use. I think for architects making their own architecture, they have to have their own mind. And a lot of these professors come in and they dominate. And when I came through, or one of the first things I saw out of SciArc is that they call them camps. So if you had a Eric Owen Moss studio, all your work looked like Eric, sorry, excuse me. And then if you had, let's just say, a Wes Jones studio, everything looked like Wes. So it was kind of weird that you would know the work at SciArc based on the professor. So I just throw out Tom Wiscombe again. You could kind of tell what his students were generating. So whether it was grad or undergraduate, I don't have every project memorized, thesis project memorized, but there was architecture as style, and then a certain style of rendering, certain kind of ray trace, certain kind of material, certain kind of tone, certain kind of overall view of shadows. So it's very plastic, and it was almost like a Beaux-Arts. If you look at how this is my formal geometry. This is what I call my tectonic, and in my tectonic, you will learn this. You'll implement it and adapt it to X amount of square feet on X project at X time, and it will look like anything that I've ever generated. So there's this master teacher kind of school that was at SciArc. I think that's changed a lot since then. That was almost 19 years ago. And then I think I'm just talking about SciArc because it's the only school I've interfaced with that's central to LA. But I would assume that SciArc is still one of the top 5 schools across America, maybe across the world. And then the top 5 schools of architecture, my opinion, would be like the Bartlett, the AA, Columbia, I would not put Harvard there anymore. Sorry. Maybe 30 years ago, who knows? Um, I would even say I think it's Pratt and then SciArc, or SciArc then Pratt somewhere. I'm not sure on the rankings, but seeing architecture today and 20 years ago, and knowing kind of full time efforts and focus, and seeing the change in architecture, not really much has changed, to be honest. It's all what's the word?
It's a slow moving profession. It's a very slow moving profession.
There's this movie Everywhere All at Once.
Oh, it's a good one. I
That
like that one.
that was architecture in 1999. Everywhere, digital, physical, graphic, spatial, diagram, morphed out Mobius DNA, um, gradient type colors. So it's been kind of super scattered for a while, which might be a subject. But one thing that I like I have my favorite architect. It's not Tom Main, just that it matters.
Who's it?
It's myself.
Nice.
So I'm starting to like me. And then when you come out of school, you're almost like the little sheep. You don't know what shepherd to follow. You want to go east, want to go north, want to go south. I wanted to go west. So I came to, and as I look back at like who the hell would want to come to freaking LA? And LA has like this evil sexiness about it before all the smartphone stuff. You didn't know people. People didn't know you. Everyone was a stranger, and it was very unfamiliar. And then I was reading not too long ago that city of LA is basically the city of nowhere. And then it has no real history. It has no real future. It's always now, like the eternal present. So what are you doing tomorrow? What do you? No one really plans like next month, next year, next decade. Everything is transitory, and everything is uncertain. So I was thinking about how architecture on the East Coast, which is very rooted, planted, traditional, manicured, it's very polite. Whereas here it's raw, it's rugged, it's in your face, it's punk. It's I don't give a X about my neighbor on this side. Suck it up. This is what we're doing. I don't care if the mechanical yard is in your front yard. You're going to hear my air conditioner system. We're going to run a data center in the middle of downtown. We're going to, absorb all the energy.
Yeah.
All we're going to do is tint the windows, and you'll never know what's inside. It was all over the place. But teaching architecture, maybe let's just focus on that. Can you teach architecture? And if so, how
The problem is architecture school is so different from architectural practice, where it's like we feel like we're learning architecture, and then we go out into the world. It's like, oh, what got me A's in architecture school does not fly in the real world. And in architecture school, we don't need all the drawings. They give us a handout in the beginning, or we give and then when you're on the other side as an instructor, you see what really happens, because we would get the handout and it's like, okay, you need 3 sections, 2 floor plans, 4 elevations, 1 detail drawing, and a 600 word text. But the person who got the A is not the person who hit all of these things, is the person who had the most interesting project. Maybe he only had 3 drawings that were really well done, and then 5 sketches, and then a 200 word text. And they had a really interesting concept, and they just went all out on the few things they decided to do, and had a complete vision and a complete theory that tied into what they picked up in the theory they learned at school, and tied Oliver Alto and Le Corbusier and something contemporary like Tom Main, and had a really interesting project, a really beautiful project, and really well done drawings. But they didn't have all the drawings, and they got a really good grade. But in the real world, the authority having jurisdiction does not care about a concept. All they care about is, do you have a detail here? Where does this wall meet this roof? Give us a detail here. Give us a section here. We want all these drawings. And that's what really guides what's built.
let's play this out. Let's say I'm the plan checker. Hey, where's your detail on this retaining wall? Why do I need a retaining wall detail?
I feel like they didn't used to require these things, but I think a lot of things happened over the last 15 years where contractors were on site and inspectors were coming and saying, this needs to be like this. And the contractor says, hey, it's not on the plans. So why does it have to? I'm building off these plans. So as time goes on, now they're requiring more and more stuff, more and more, a lot of MEP stuff, a lot of show us the dimensions of the AC unit outside, show us even sometimes the ducts on the floor plan, show us where the water heater is going to go, how big it's going to be, show us, give us maybe an electrical calc, how many volts, how many amps, and things that you would think is outside of the architect's scope is ending up being in the architect's scope. Things that we didn't even remotely touch on in architecture school, or maybe we had a couple classes that tried to, but all we cared about was studio. We had a studio project we're going to pin up, present. There's going to be a jury of architects that we look up to critiquing us, and that's the only class we really cared about. We had professional practice that was supposed to give us some insights on how to prepare a set of construction documents that might be approved by an authority having jurisdiction, but none of us cared. We were in the back working on our studio projects on our laptops, sketching out our studio projects, preparing for our pinups, and we only cared about studio, which is or isn't good. I don't know. I'm not making value statements. It's just how it was.
All right, thanks.
What do you think?
I
Is that how
thi-
you were in school too? Only cared about studio? Other classes were background?
I'll go back 20 years. So when I graduated school, we had this thing called 9/11,
Oh,
and it was called the World Trade Center collapse. And immediately following that, for about 2 years, it was also residual negative economy. I'm not sure about inflation rates, all that stuff, but it was after the bubble pop, and then it got slapped with 9/11. Then a lot of international terrorism, and then no one was building anything because they thought a plane would fly into it. And we're like, oh wow, I never really thought of a plane flying into my high rise, but now I'll have to. So, not to go on a micro tangent, but never really understood why Building 7 north of the World Trade Center collapsed if no one was in there and no plane hit it. But if you go back on record and you see the video, Building 7 collapsed, but there was no airplane. That's a good question, right?
Yeah.
That's a conspiracy. I don't want to open that up, but
it's
from
worth
our
looking into.
yeah, Building 7.
There's a whole thing of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth that signed off on Building 7 being a weird collapse. So I think the official story is that the shock wave, which is possible, maybe it's possible that the shock wave from the buildings that the planes actually hit made its way through the air to Building 7. But
It's a bedrock foundation. I don't know how you transfer that K force, but kinetic energy, laterally when it goes that way. But so I got a job at Plexus somehow through the luck of the draw. They were on the cover of Architect Record and the year, and I brought this because we did a gallery December 2002, and I wanted to get out of South Carolina because it was not much happening. So I interviewed with a few firms in Chicago. This is the coldest place on the planet. Decided that place I would never want to visit again. And then Eric and Jordan brought me in, and I remember 2003 October, they gave me this crazy design exercise of a crane cart, and it had to move around the site on a track, and we were using containers, and it was a design exercise, and I lost a lot of sleep. And the next day, Eric said I passed the test, that it was official. I could do Plexus design, and I said, well, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You got the Plexus look. Once you get the Plexus look, you can do Plexus design. And once you do Plexus design, you're billable." I was like, "Oh, wow. You mean I get to keep my job?" And he said, "Yes." So Plexus was one of the top 3, 4 firms in Atlanta, but it was very small boutique. But I liked it as an intern because I got to help do the printing, order the materials, order the paper. I got to look through resumes, got to work on various gallery competitions, that kind of stuff. And the coolest thing about Eric and Jordan is they would invite me to Georgia Tech and SBSU. So they were teaching architecture studio, and they would have me critique their students. So as an intern, seeing other architecture designs and seeing how they taught architecture was pretty good. And I would say both Eric and Jordan were really good teachers and bossmen and boutique designers. But after leaving Atlanta, I ended up coming to West, and then I'll probably stop it there for LA architecture speak. But going back and teaching architecture, I think is something that the individual person has to learn. They have to get their own motivation, their own drive, and then they have to have their own questions, their own desires, their own motivations. Because it's going to be a constant war. It's going to be a constant battle. It's going to be always uphill. It'll never be downhill. You'll be lucky to get paid. You'll be lucky that anything ever happens on time, or especially super early with permitting. And then I think the things that they didn't teach you in school was, a lot of team coordination. It was more about the solo and being the Michael Jackson of the group, I guess, versus the Devo, just kind of mixing it all in, and then to whip it good, to whip it. But being the quarterback and being the head coach is two different things. And I think in architecture school they teach you to be the quarterback, to just run the ball, throw the ball, hike the ball, kick the ball, whatever it is. Um, but in the practice in the real world, you have to find out who's going to pay you, who has a checkbook, who writes a check that doesn't bounce, who has a real site, who has a real project. A lot of times that I found is that people kind of know what they want before they even call you. So they sit on a sketch and then have you sketch, and if your sketch doesn't look like their sketch, then the sketches don't work out. And most of the time, you got to click with these clients, which will be like your professor, in order to go to the next level to get something built. So I would think that's global East Coast and West Coast, whether it's institutional client, business client, warehouse client, retail client. And then one of the first things that I remember seeing way back were these Chick-fil-A's coming out of Preston Partnerships in Atlanta, Georgia. That's right. You know who you are. You were doing 3D Max in 1996. And they never offered me a job, but I went into the super corporate office. It looked like a micro Gensler. Everything was super generic, Knoll, steel case, furniture, plain Jane, IKEA. Just kind of wanted to barf walking in there, and it had zero character. And basically, you take a project, save as, rename, key in the address, and then all the title blocks get updated. Hit Control P, print 29 times, stamp it, and go. And that was a hard reality from what school was, where you had exploration, you looked at certain building features, entries, glazing, solar, materials. So in school, I think the process that they teach you isn't the process in the world. So there's things that get lost in translation that are non-transferable.
Architecture school, in a way, did lie to us, but it was a beautiful lie. And we were in studio. We each had authorship over our own project, but we were in studio all day, all night, critiquing each other, bouncing ideas off of each other, and having a bunch of ideas that we can choose from. And we were the authors of our projects. But that's so far from the reality. And then the other thing was stay up all night, get it done. And then you bring that mentality into the real world and you're broke because I'm going to stay up all night and get it done versus I'm going to get paid for every line I draw. It's like, no one told us to get paid for every line we draw. They told us to stay up all night and get it done. And the shift that happens, I mean, I think we're both still young for architects.
I started at 25. Sorry,
Oh, dang.
I'm a late bloomer.
You started architecture school at 25?
Actually, 24 and a half. I'm
Okay.
rounding up.
Dude, I started architecture school when I was 17. I went to my B arc.
I failed out of the Marine Corps, accounting, and electrical engineering. I took architecture because I just wanted to get paid to draw. And then I started making straight A's. So I just stuck with it. I didn't grow up wanting to be Frank Lloyd Wright or Corbu or Mies. I didn't know who these clowns were. But once I got kind of hooked into it, I know what hooked me as kind of a drug feed and trying to make was like Coop Himmelblau kind of work was like the Rolling Stone of design, I guess. That's bad dead verbiage. But
Wait, you called Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and Mies van der Rohe clowns? A lot of people will say those are like the three of the greatest architects ever of all time.
I think Corbu is. I don't like Mies. Um, let's save that for its own episode, and maybe we can use more images and drawings of why. If you look at like, so Joan Achman did a lecture in 1996 at Clemson, and she talked for 1 hour and 15 minutes about Mies van der Rohe. And the thing about Mies van der Rohe is that um, he used this concept of called appropriation. So in terms of the sales Shark Tank gimmick or what he was trying to promote with his business, is that he was doing like this modified, streamlined, efficiency, functional, where the structure was being expressed. But if you look at these I beams, they're basically zapped the gap, glued onto the exterior. They're
Which
at
building?
Seagram's building.
Whoa.
It's got the Four Seasons. And then,
Wait, really? It has decorative stuff like that?
so look up Joan Achman, look up this concept of appropriation. So if, I don't know, the FAR was the only thing cool.
It is a beautiful building though, and very like minimal, which was not really being done at the time. But I could see where you're going. Like it's if he's kind of faking it, it defeats the idea.
Yeah, it's got these vertical, I think, W8s or W10s running continuously from the bottom to the top. And then it could be a kind of a Gothic if you look at it that way too, in terms of the ribs being exposed, but a hyper minimal expression. The city was going vertical and it's going less ornament. And then again, the philosophy of architecture is personal, but I think ornament as a crime is something Adolf Loos generated in Vienna. And then I only saw one or two of his houses during my fellowship. But architecture as philosophy, teaching architecture, and then communicating architecture is probably the hardest things. I was thinking over the weekend, architects are like these phantoms. They just show up on site, work their magic, this abracadabra, hocus pocus. Um, they have to demystify everything in terms of trying to get the builder set up to construct it, and then they just disappear. So it's this phantom menace.
In theory, we should be making site visits, working with the general contractors around the client throughout construction. But usually, what happens is we get the permit, and then we're out of the picture, and then now it's the contractor and the owner. But I mean, it'd be cool if we were more involved with the construction phase, or maybe it wouldn't be because that would give us less time to be designing the next project.
So I think to move forward is if architecture is this liquid, hybrid, ambiguous thing, and there's, I think to enter into a discourse or a discussion about what it is, you could almost say what it's not, and then if you listen to music on the radio and it just bores you, it's probably not music. If you flip the station and then you flip the station again and you flip the station again and then you flip the station again, there's nothing on the radio. So there's nothing of interest. So if you have a lot of buildings, let's just say in LA, 90%, and none of them interest you, why the hell come here?
Yeah.
Most 10% do, or 8%, or whatever percent.
I remember Peter Eisenman saying, you go to a bookstore, you see a lot of books, very few of them are literature. You see a lot of movies coming out, very few of them are cinema. And then very few of the buildings being built are architecture, which is probably true.
So I think we should save some for next time. Maybe we get more into the AI and how AI is impacting what I call 2024, how I see it, what I've been involved with. Maybe we can bring that in next time.
Yeah,
Maybe
for sure.
wrap it up, and then maybe talk about having an architectural signature, and then who has the greatest signature, and then and I'll just highlight maybe as a preview, like Richard Meyer. Where did he create his signature? Where is he from? He's from the East Coast. He's out of New York. He's got buildings everywhere. He did the Getty in LA, kind of not his backyard. He's more of a Cornell student if you look at some of these. So in architecture, you got the great-grandfathers, the grandfathers, the fathers, and then let's say children, nephews, and cousins. So we're kind of like cousins from a different generation. And then, not to go into too much names, but it's good to kind of know where you are in the genealogy. And we brought in the Old New Testament, but the Old Testament is all about genealogy and knowing, I guess, Moses from King Solomon and his descendants. But my opinion is when you get exposed to architecture, hooked on architecture, cracked out on it, that's what you know. And that's what sticks with you. That's what's in your blood, your veins, your brains, your whiskers. And then in terms of Shark Tank, to circle back to that, that's what you're always going to do. You're going to scratch the same record the same way for the next same 50 years. Unless you're Frank Lloyd Wright, and then you just get a new record and you learn to scratch different. So putting on new records, putting on new styles, putting on new movements, that takes a lot of design iteration and different worldviews. So maybe we could kind of go there. To change the music, to change the architect, to change architecture, you need to change how it's conceived and then processed and then actually assembled.
Fun conversation, man. I'm really glad we're finally doing this after talking about it for a long ass time. And definitely we should chop up a few shorts out of this and then next time have another conversation. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Please like.
Peace, love, positivity.
Cheers.
Cheers.